If you have been following this series, you already know that the question is no longer whether humanity will make open contact with extraterrestrial civilizations. Based on the body of channeled material we have been working through, the question is which civilizations, in what order, and what that sequence is going to feel like from where we are standing right now. We began this series with the Yahyel, and for good reason. According to the most consistent and well-sourced channeled accounts, the Yahyel are the civilization most likely to be the first to make open, physical, face-to-face contact with humanity. Not a light in the sky, not a signal. Actual face-to-face contact. The best estimates in the channeled record suggest this could happen as early as 2027. The Yahyel are gentle, hybrid in nature, deeply invested in humanity's well-being, and have been specifically preparing for this role as first ambassadors for a very long time. Then we looked at the Pleiadians, the civilization whose connection to humanity runs so deep and so ancient that in many traditions they are remembered not as visitors, but as ancestors. The Pleiadians are likely to be among the first civilizations to establish open communication channels with Earth, not through individual channelers as they already do, but in a broader, more publicly acknowledged way, speaking to humanity collectively rather than to single receptive individuals in quiet rooms. Today we arrive at the third civilization in this sequence of contact. A civilization that is, in some ways, the most extraordinary of all three, because their relationship with humanity is not ancient and ancestral like the Pleiadians, and not that of long-term watchers like the Yahyel. Their relationship with us is something stranger, more intimate, and more philosophically challenging than either of those. The Essassani. The Essassani are us. Not metaphorically, not spiritually, genetically, structurally, evolutionarily. They are a future version of what humanity is becoming. Essentially, they are our descendants. They carry our DNA. They express our emotional depth in a form that has been refined and expanded beyond anything we currently experience. They have been to the other side of the transition we are now living through and built an entire civilization from what they found there. And they have been talking to us about it for over 40 years. Based on the channeled record, the Essassani are likely to be the third civilization that humanity enters into meaningful contact with in the post-2027 landscape. Their particular form of contact is expected to develop through communication initially, with physical visits anticipated before 2035. The reasons for this sequence, and what that contact is likely to involve, will become clear as we move through what we know about who the Essassani actually are. So let us begin, not with the messenger, but with the message, not with the channel, but with the civilization. I should note here that even though the race of people is called the Sassani and the planet is called Essassani, as many followers of Essassani teachings continue to use and search for the word Essassani. And also, so as not to confuse listeners new to this information, I will use Essassani predominantly throughout to describe everything connected with their culture, much like we might call ourselves Earthlings. How we know what we know. Before we go deep into the Essassani themselves, it is worth spending a few minutes on the question of how we have come to know any of this, because the source of this information is unusual enough that it deserves honest acknowledgement. Almost everything we know about the Essassani comes through a practice called trance-channeling, specifically through a body of work that began in 1984 when a Hollywood visual effects designer named Darryl Anka first made contact with an entity who identified himself as Bashar. That contact has continued for more than 4 decades, apart from a short break to give us time to prepare for the events now known as 9/11, and has produced hundreds of sessions covering the Essassani civilization in extraordinary, internally consistent detail. Bashar is himself an Essassani being, a member of the civilization we are about to explore in depth, communicating from what he describes as hundreds of years in our probable future. Bashar is not the only Essassani in contact with Earth. An entity called Elan communicates through a channeler known simply as Andrew, who was himself trained in channeling through the Bashar connection. And a being called Ryo or Ryokah, previously known as Ryokah, communicates through a newer channeler named Tyler Ellison, active in this work since 2014. 3 separate beings, 3 separate human channels, all describing the same civilization from their own distinct angles. What makes this body of material worth taking seriously is not just its longevity, but its internal consistency. The same facts, the same place names, the same physics, the same social structures, the same philosophical principles have been described across hundreds of independent sessions by multiple channels over decades. That level of consistency is either evidence of genuine contact or evidence of one of the most elaborate and sustained creative collaborations in human history. Either way, the material rewards serious study. We will be drawing on official channelings throughout this presentation. When we say something was confirmed in an official Bashar channeling, that means it comes from the recorded session record, not from secondary summaries or community speculation. And where the record is less clear, we will say so. With that context established, let us cross 500 light-years and visit the world of living light. The birth of a new species. The Essassani did not evolve on a planet over billions of years the way humanity did, well, with some help. The Essassani were, in the most precise sense of the word, created. They are the product of a deliberate hybridization program, cosmically sanctioned and carefully guided, that blended human DNA with the genetics of the gray beings. This immediately raises questions, and rightly so. The Greys have a complicated reputation in the broader lore of extraterrestrial contact. For decades, they have been associated in popular culture primarily with abduction accounts, with fear, with a cold clinical intelligence that seems indifferent to human emotional experience. But the Essassani account of the Greys is considerably more nuanced than that cultural image. According to official Bashar channelings, the gray beings had, over an enormous span of time, evolved themselves into a state of extreme intellectual development at the cost of their emotional and physical range. They became too crystallized in the mental domain. Their genetic line was weakening. Through their own long evolutionary journey, they had essentially refined the emotional and intuitive dimensions out of themselves. And they recognized, with the extraordinary clarity their intellect allowed, that they needed something humanity has in abundance. Humanity, for all of its chaos and confusion, is one of the most emotionally rich species in the galaxy. The depth, the range, the raw intensity of human emotional experience is apparently remarkable by galactic standards. It is both our greatest challenge and, as the Essassani story illustrates, one of our most precious gifts to the broader cosmic community. The hybridization program brought these 2 very different biological and consciousness templates together. The Greys' precision, focus, and multidimensional intellectual capacity combined with humanity's emotional depth, intuitive sensitivity, and connection to physical experience. The goal was not to create a servant species or a biological tool. The goal was to create a new sovereign civilization that could transcend the limitations of both parent species and become something genuinely new in the galaxy. The Essassani are what you might call a more advanced stage of this hybrid program. There were earlier generations of hybrids, each one refining the balance between the two genetic streams, moving closer to the particular equilibrium that defines Essassani consciousness. These earlier generations are described in the channeled record as distinct civilizations in their own right. The Yahyel, whom we explored in the first video in this series, are also part of this hybrid lineage, which is why the Yahyel and the Essassani share certain qualities while being clearly distinct peoples. The Syrian beings are described in official channelings as having played a guiding oversight role in this broader project across its multiple phases. The end result, the Essassani themselves, are a people who carry both the intellectual clarity of their gray ancestry and the emotional warmth of their human lineage, and who have built upon both to create something neither parent species could have achieved alone. They are not a compromise between two things. They are a synthesis that exceeds both. The world called Essassani, Place of Living Light. It sits approximately 500 light-years from Earth in the direction of the Orion constellation. That is the consistent figure given across multiple official Bashar channelings, not a rough estimate, but a specific measurement he has returned to reliably across decades of sessions. The planet itself is described as a world of exceptional natural beauty, a high-frequency environment where the ecosystem operates in a state of dynamic balance. And that balance is maintained, at least in part, by something that has no parallel in Earth's history: 3 artificial moons. In official Bashar channelings, he has confirmed the names of these 3 artificial moons, giving their English equivalents as Epsilon, Eclipse, and Epiphany. These were not naturally occurring satellites. They were engineered by the gray beings during the terraforming of Essassani, created specifically to function as ecosystem stabilizers. Think of them as planetary life support systems, operating at an orbital scale, maintaining the vibrational coherence of the planet's environment and keeping its living systems in their thriving, vibrant state. The engineering of 3 artificial moons to perform ecological stabilization is an almost incomprehensibly advanced technological achievement by human standards. But for a civilization that understands consciousness and intention as physical forces that can be applied to material systems, the distinction between technology and awareness dissolves. These moons are not simply machines. In the Essassani understanding, they function more like organs of the planetary body, responsive to the collective consciousness of the world they serve. The Essassani planet is a genuinely inhabited world with its own ecosystems, landscapes, and community life. The name Place of Living Light is not merely poetic. It describes a world where the boundary between physical matter and luminous energy is far more permeable than anything we experience on Earth. Light behaves differently there, responds differently, participates in life differently. The Essassani, which is the name for the individual inhabitants of Essassani, live in communities whose structure reflects their social values rather than economic necessity. There are no cities built around industry or commerce. There are no districts organized by wealth. Community life on Essassani is organized around resonance, around genuine affinity and shared purpose, around the living expression of who each community member actually is, Large vessels, which we will discuss in detail shortly, are a significant feature of Essassani civilization. Their culture has a genuinely nomadic dimension, where travel and exploration are woven into the fabric of daily life, rather than being exceptional events. But this nomadic quality exists alongside the planetary life of Essassani itself, not in replacement of it. What the Essassani look like. Physically, the Essassani are humanoid. They share the basic bilateral symmetry of the human form: 2 arms, 2 legs, a head, upright posture. This is not a coincidence. It is a direct inheritance from the human side of their hybrid origin. Anyone encountering an Essassani for the first time would immediately recognize them as fundamentally human in their general configuration. But there are distinctive differences that mark both their gray ancestry and their more advanced energetic state. The Essassani are smaller than the average human, more slender in build, with noticeably larger eyes, a characteristic that comes from the gray lineage. Their features are finer and more delicate than a human face. Their overall impression is one of lightness, in both the physical and luminous sense of that word. The most striking physical characteristic of the Essassani is what happens to their appearance as a function of their vibrational state. In official channelings, they are described as existing in what is called a quasi-physical state, straddling the boundary between 4th and 5th density existence. At their natural full resonance, they are partially transparent. There is a pearlescent, luminous quality to their physical form, a quality of light shining through rather than simply reflecting off the surface. Their bodies carry an inner glow. This translucence is not a cosmetic feature. It is a direct physical expression of their energetic reality. The Essassani exist with 1 foot, metaphorically speaking, in the physical domain we inhabit, and 1 foot in a non-physical, purely energetic domain that our senses and instruments cannot directly perceive. At their highest natural resonance, they would be completely invisible to human eyes, simply because their vibrational frequency falls outside the range of what we can detect. To become visible to humans, an Essassani must consciously step down their vibration, bring themselves into closer alignment with our denser frequency range. This is something they can do deliberately when contact requires it, but it is not their default state. Their default state is luminous, partially transparent, moving between the physical and the non-physical, with the ease of someone who has always lived at that border. This quasi-physical quality became significantly more pronounced following a major threshold event in 2013, which we will explore in depth in its own section. What matters here is that the physical appearance of the Essassani, as described in the channeled record, is not static. It is the appearance of a civilization in the active process of becoming less material and more luminous, moving toward a state where the distinction between a body and a field of conscious light becomes increasingly difficult to maintain. How the Essassani communicate. To understand Essassani communication, you first have to set aside the framework in which communication is something that happens between separate beings who need a medium, words, sounds, signals, to bridge the gap between them. The Essassani have an ancient language, a spoken tongue with a specific and remarkable characteristic confirmed in official channelings. It shares deep structural and sonic resonances with 2 earth languages, Sanskrit and Japanese. This is not a coincidence from the Essassani perspective. They describe Earth's most ancient sacred languages as carrying vibrational imprints that align with universal patterns of sound and consciousness. Patterns that appear independently in any civilization that develops a sophisticated understanding of the relationship between resonance, awareness, and physical reality. Some of these ancient words have been shared in channelings including Arvayo, which means in service, Shivai, which means make way for I am on a mission, and Ha-tu, which is a form of greeting. There is also another greeting which is Ili Ova, which means something like in the reflection between us. However, this ancient tongue is no longer the primary medium of Essassani daily life. It has been superseded by something far more immediate and complete. Something that the channeled record describes using a specific coined term: telepathy. Telepathy is not telepathy. Telepathy, as it is commonly imagined, involves the transmission of thoughts from one mind to another. Telepathy is something fundamentally different. When Essassani communicate in their primary mode, they do not transmit thoughts. They share the full experiential texture of a state of being. Not just the thought, but the emotional resonance that gives the thought its meaning. Not just the idea, but the felt sense, the quality of consciousness, the entire living context of the experience itself. Consider what this means. Every human language is a system of proxies. Words stand in for experiences that the words themselves cannot contain. You can spend an hour describing a sunset to someone who has never seen color and still not transmit what the experience actually is. All human communication is, at some level, a negotiation across that gap between the word and the thing the word points toward. Misunderstanding is not an accident of poor communication. It is structurally built into the nature of symbolic language. Telepathy removes the proxy entirely. The experience itself moves from one being to another, complete and intact, without the distortion of translation. When two Essassani are in full vibrational alignment with each other, there is no gap between them that requires bridging. The sharing of states of being happens directly, the way warmth travels from one hand to another through contact. There is nothing to decode, nothing to interpret, nothing that can be lost in translation because there is no translation. In practice, this means that spoken language among the Essassani has become largely ceremonial. It is used in contexts where the specific vibrational quality of sound itself is the intended experience, not where information needs to be conveyed, which is a beautiful inversion of how we use language. For the Essassani, speaking is not practical. It is artistic. It is the way they reach for something beyond the ordinary. The Shadok, where stone becomes a doorway. In a special production documenting Essassani history and culture through the life of one of their contact ambassadors, a structure called the Shadok, or Shadok, was described as one of the most significant ancient structures in Essassani civilization. And when its details emerged in the channeled record, they immediately invited comparison to something very familiar here on Earth. The Shadok is a stone structure built in the ancient era of Essassani history. In official channelings, it has been compared to Stonehenge in its general character, but the differences are as important as the similarities. Where Stonehenge is arranged in a circular pattern, the Shadok is spiral in shape. A series of tall rectangular standing stones arranged in an expanding spiral that stretches across several acres of land. No connecting lintel stones cross the tops of the uprights, unlike Stonehenge. The stones stand alone. What makes the Shadok unique is what occupies the spaces between the standing stones. In the gap between each pair of uprights, thin slices of specifically selected stone hang suspended, fashioned to precise dimensions, chosen for their particular resonant properties. Hundreds of these hanging stones, each one calibrated to produce a specific tone when struck. Stone chimes, carefully tuned, distributed throughout the entire spiral structure, so that moving through the shadok is moving through a landscape of latent sound. Individuals stand before these hanging stones and strike them in specific sequences depending on the intended purpose. The resulting tones are specifically designed to resonate with what Bashar describes as stone consciousness and to induce in participants the precise state of being required for telepathic connection with the structural field of the shadok itself. But the structure's function goes beyond inducing meditative states. The spaces between the standing stones are described in the channeled record as dimensional doorways, not metaphorically. Actually, the specific tones produced by the hanging chimes, when struck in the correct sequences, unlock access to other dimensions, other realities, and other levels of experience. The shadok is simultaneously a musical instrument, a consciousness technology, and a dimensional transit system. The sound is the key. Now hold that image next to everything we know and do not know about Stonehenge, built at enormous effort by a prehistoric culture using techniques that still puzzle researchers, arranged with extraordinary astronomical precision, located on a landscape with measurable electromagnetic anomalies. The standard explanations, a calendar, a burial monument, a ritual space, have always felt slightly inadequate to the scale and deliberateness of the construction. Essassani Society. Life without scarcity. To understand what daily life looks like among the Essassani, you have to set aside almost every framework we use to organize human societies. There is no economy built around scarcity. There is no government competing for power over others. There is no legal system primarily concerned with managing conflict. These structures are not outlawed on Essassani. They are simply absent because the conditions that make them necessary on Earth do not exist there. The organizing principle of Essassani, individual and collective life, is what, through the channeled record, we can describe as alignment with highest excitement. This is a phrase that sounds deceptively simple and is frequently misunderstood in its English framing. It does not mean pursuing pleasure while avoiding difficulty. It means that every individual is consistently oriented toward the action, direction, or expression that most fully embodies who they are and why they are present in the world. The activity that carries the highest vibrational charge for them at any given moment. When every member of a society does this simultaneously, the result is not chaos. It is extraordinary spontaneous coordination because genuine individual alignment turns out to produce collective harmony more reliably than any system of obligation or enforcement ever has. Work and play are not distinguished categories in Essassani life. The highest expression of individual creativity is also the individual's most valuable contribution to the collective. Art, exploration, philosophy, healing, contact work with other civilizations. These are not separated into professional categories. They are the same thing, lived from the inside. The Essassani are prolific creators. Artistic expression is not a leisure category in their civilization, something reserved for time off from practical concerns. It is one of the primary ways consciousness engages with reality. Sculpture, architecture, music, light, all are integrated into daily life at every level. And because the Essassani understanding of materiality differs fundamentally from ours, the scale at which their creative work operates exceeds human artistic ambition in ways that are difficult to fully imagine. We know from official channelings that light sculptures of extraordinary scale are a feature of Essassani artistic life. Luminous structures that extend miles high into the atmosphere of their world, expressing ideas and states of being that no language in any form could contain. The intersection of their technological capability and their artistic impulse produces a kind of creativity for which we do not yet have adequate language. How Essassani children come into the world. The way new life arrives among the Essassani is one of the most specific and unusual pieces of information in the entire channeled record, and it tells us something important about how profoundly different their relationship with physical reality is from our own. Essassani procreation is not physical in the way human reproduction is. There is no biological sexual reproduction in the manner we understand it. Instead, when two Essassani wish to bring a new being into the world, they engage in a process of energetic merging. They expand their personal energy fields outward and allow those fields to overlap and interpenetrate, creating a shared vibrational space between them. Given what we know about telepathy, this is an act of extraordinary intimacy. This is not two bodies in physical proximity. This is two complete experiential fields, two entire inner lives, temporarily becoming one. Everything each being is and experiences becomes simultaneously present to the other, undiluted and unmediated. Within this merged field, the incoming soul, the consciousness that wishes to be born into Essassani life, participates actively in its own creation. The new being helps crystallize the energetic template for its own physical form from within the shared field. The parents are not manufacturing the child. They are creating the conditions for the child's consciousness to manifest its own physical expression. The soul arrives first. The body follows. The physical form that emerges from this process does not appear as an infant in the way human babies are born. According to official Bashar channelings, the child materializes physically at roughly 3 to 4 Earth years of age, already formed, already with a foundational sense of its own identity and purpose. This child is then raised in a communal setting, supported not just by its parents, but by a wider community of family members, mentors, and guides who together hold the space for that particular consciousness to unfold fully into its expression. The communal nature of child rearing among the Essassani reflects the broader social philosophy that no individual consciousness belongs exclusively to the family unit that welcomed it. Every Essassani child is understood as having come with something specific to contribute, and the entire surrounding community has both a stake and a role in ensuring that contribution can fully emerge. The ships. How the Essassani travel. The Essassani travel extensively, not just within their home system, but across the galaxy, visiting other civilizations, conducting research, maintaining diplomatic relationships, and in the case of their contact ambassadors, hovering patiently above planets like ours, waiting for the right moment to make themselves known. Understanding how they travel and what they travel in illuminates something fundamental about how they understand the nature of space itself. Essassani spacecraft come in broadly 3 categories: small triangular scout vessels, typically carrying a handful of occupants, used for close approach work, planetary visits, and relatively local travel. Medium research vessels of various configurations, used for longer-range exploration and scientific study. And enormous cylindrical motherships that function less like spacecraft in the conventional sense and more like self-contained mobile civilizations. These motherships can be anywhere from 1 to 3,000 kilometers in length. They contain multiple nested decks serving every function imaginable, from community housing to research facilities to diplomatic spaces to hangar bays for launching and receiving smaller craft. The outermost layer of a mothership typically serves as an open platform for incoming and departing vessels, an architectural choice that reflects the Essassani's fundamental orientation toward openness and connection. Their largest vessels are not fortresses. They are, in their design philosophy, permanently open doors. What makes Essassani craft fundamentally different from anything in human aerospace engineering is how they are made. They are not manufactured. They are grown. The process of creating a vessel involves combining crystalline and metallic materials with conscious intent in a way that is more analogous to cultivation than construction. The ship emerges as a product of both material and awareness simultaneously, which is why Essassani craft have the remarkable property of being semi-sentient. They are not fully conscious in the way a Essassani being is, but they are responsive. They perceive the intentions of their occupants and adjust accordingly. The interior configuration of an Essassani craft can reshape itself to serve different purposes. Surfaces and spaces rearrange to support meditation, research, meetings, rest, or navigation as needed. The ship and its crew exist in a continuous state of mutual responsiveness, a relationship more like that between a rider and a highly attentive living animal than between an operator and a piece of machinery. Most of the time, Essassani craft vibrate at a frequency that places them entirely outside the range of human sight. They are present but invisible, not because they are deliberately hiding, but because their natural operational frequency simply does not intersect with human visual perception. To become visible, an Essassani craft must consciously step down its vibrational state, and when it does, it appears to human observers as a glowing, luminous object whose surface shifts color and brightness with its energetic state. But the most extraordinary aspect of Essassani travel is not the ships themselves. It is what the ships do and do not do. They do not move through space. The Essassani travel method does not involve traversing the distance between one location and another. There are no engines, no exotic propulsion, no wormholes in the conventional sense. Instead, Essassani travel uses what the channeled record describes as locational resonance. The ship generates what is called an isolation energy bubble around itself. This bubble effectively detaches the vessel from its current coordinates in local space, removing it from its existing physical location entirely. The crew then adjusts the ship's overall vibrational signature to precisely match the vibrational signature of their desired destination. At the moment of that match, the ship dematerializes from its current location and rematerializes instantaneously at the target point. There is no journey, there is no travel time, no traversal of intervening space. The ship does not go from here to there. It simply ceases to exist here and begins to exist there. Distance, in the conventional sense, becomes completely irrelevant. This is not faster than light travel. It is something categorically different. It is a redefinition of what movement means when location itself is understood as a function of vibrational frequency rather than a fixed coordinate in a fixed container. The philosophical implications are significant. If location is a property of frequency rather than of space, then the universe is not primarily a vast emptiness between islands of matter. It is a continuous field of possible vibrational states, and the ability to precisely tune your frequency is the ability to be anywhere, instantly, without moving at all. The 5 laws that govern all of reality. At the core of everything the Essassani teach is a framework they describe as the 5 universal laws. These are not laws specific to the Essassani civilization. They are described as the foundational principles upon which all of reality, all consciousness, all existence in the entire cosmos is constructed. They apply equally to every being in every civilization at every level of development. The Essassani did not create these laws. They simply, in their long evolution, came to understand and articulate them with great clarity. The first law is the law of existence. You always exist. Consciousness is eternal. There is no state of non-existence available to any conscious being. You may change form, shift dimension, transform beyond recognition. But the fundamental quality of existing cannot be removed from you. This is not a comforting belief. It is, according to the Essassani transmission, a precise description of how reality actually functions. The second law is the law of oneness. The one is all and the all are one. Everything that exists is part of a single unified consciousness that has chosen to experience itself through an infinite diversity of individual expressions. Separation, the experience of being a distinct individual in a world of other distinct individuals, is a perspective that consciousness voluntarily takes on for the richness of individual experience. It is never the ultimate structural truth of what is actually happening. At the deepest level, there is only one thing, experiencing itself from an infinite number of vantage points simultaneously. The third law is the law of reflection, sometimes called the law of reciprocity. What you put out is what you get back. Your experience of reality is a direct mirror of your current vibrational state. This is frequently misunderstood as a description of karma, the idea of a cosmic ledger where good actions are rewarded and bad actions are punished. But official Bashar channelings are very explicit and emphatic on this point. The reflection law is not karma. Karma implies moral judgment, a weighing and balancing, a consequence that arrives as reward or punishment. The reflection law carries no judgment whatsoever. It is neutral, instantaneous, and ongoing. Your vibrational state is simply what reality reflects back to you as your experience. Change the frequency, and the reflection changes. No ledger, no judgment, no delay. Just a perfect, continuous, morally neutral mirror. The fourth law is the law of change. Everything changes except the first 4 laws. Change is the only constant in the universe. Every state is in transition. Every form is in the process of becoming something else. Every civilization, every body, every belief, every reality is an ongoing event rather than a fixed object. And the only guaranteed path to suffering in the Essassani teaching is the attempt to prevent change, because it is the only thing that is genuinely and completely impossible. The fifth and final law, which in some sense encompasses all the others, is the law of the eternal now. Everything exists here and now. The past is not a location that exists somewhere behind us. The future is not a location somewhere ahead of us. Both are present-moment constructs, perspectives that consciousness takes on within the ongoing eternal now of existence. All of time, from this vantage point, is a landscape that consciousness navigates, not by moving forward through it, but by shifting its point of attention within it. Held together as a single framework, these 5 laws constitute a description of reality that is internally coherent, philosophically sophisticated, and consistent across the entire 40-plus year record of Essassani channeling. They form the foundation of a civilization's understanding of itself and its universe, and they are offered to humanity not as doctrine, but as a description of what is already true, whether we recognize it yet or not. The 2013 Shift. 3 worlds, 1 moment. There is a moment in the Essassani story that recontextualizes everything before and after it. A moment that, according to official Bashar channelings, did not happen only to the Essassani but simultaneously to 3 distinct civilizations at 3 different positions in the cosmos. In 2013, as confirmed through direct session listening, Bashar described a simultaneous energetic upgrade that occurred across 3 civilizations at exactly the same moment. Sirius, the Essassani, and Earth all crossed a threshold together. Not in sequence, not as a domino effect rippling from the most advanced to the least, simultaneously. 3 worlds at very different stages of their development, participating in a single coordinated cosmic event. For the Essassani, the 2013 shift represented a deepening of their transition into 5th density existence, a state of being that is less and less material, more and more luminous, less constrained by physical form in the ways we typically understand physical constraint. The shift was significant enough that the name the Essassani use for themselves changed to reflect it. They no longer refer to their planet as Essassani, at least not in their own current timeline. Their planet is now known as Essassani, a new name for a new state of being, marking a threshold that cannot be uncrossed. For Sirius, the shift represented its own corresponding transition at the level of that civilization's development. The Syrian connection to the Essassani is ancient and deep. The Syrians played a guiding oversight role in the broader hybrid project that ultimately produced the Essassani civilization, and official channelings confirm that non-physical Syrian beings have continued to assist Essassani evolution in an ongoing way. The 2013 event bound these 2 already closely linked civilizations even more tightly in their shared developmental trajectory. For Earth, 2013 corresponded to what many traditions and communities experienced as a significant turning point, the culmination of a long cycle and the beginning of something new. The end point of the Mayan long count calendar. The shift into what various traditions call a new age of consciousness, described in different vocabularies in different cultures, but pointing consistently toward a fundamental qualitative change in the consciousness available to human beings. It was also the time that the Interstellar Alliance lifted its guiding law that Earth was under quarantine. Not quarantine to keep us in, but quarantine for the rest of the galaxy to stay out, to give us time to develop. The quarantine was lifted, and from 2013 onwards, extraterrestrials no longer had to be careful about interrupting our progress. For all intents and purposes, the Interstellar Alliance indicated we were ready for first open contact from their end. They were now going to wait patiently until we were ready, collectively, from our end. What is significant about the Essassani account is the simultaneity. This was not a more advanced civilization pulling a less advanced one forward. This was 3 civilizations at 3 different stages participating as co-equal partners in a single, larger harmonic event. The image that emerges is not of a hierarchy where the more evolved lead and the less evolved follow. It is of a symphony where different instruments reach their transformative moments together because the score requires it, not because one section has caught up to another. This framing shifts something important about how we might understand Earth's current moment. We are not behind. We are not the struggling students in the back of the galactic classroom. We are instruments in a symphony that includes Sirius and the Essassani, playing our specific part at our specific time, in a performance that has been building toward something none of the individual participants can fully see from within it. The ship above the desert, a barometer of our readiness. Now we come to one of the most specific, most trackable, and in some ways most extraordinary claims in the entire Essassani record. It is the claim that has the most directly observable correlate in the world we actually live in. Not a philosophical principle or a description of a distant world, but a physical object hovering above a specific geographical location whose altitude has been reported in official channeling sessions for almost 2 decades. In an official channeling session in 2006, Bashar announced that he was stationing his personal ship above Sedona, Arizona, in the American Southwest. Specifically above the Bell Rock Vortex area, one of the most energetically distinctive geological formations in a landscape already famous for unusual energetic properties. His explanation was that Sedona represents what he called a neutral zone, a location where energies from multiple dimensions converge with particular clarity, making it an ideal anchor point for the interdimensional communication works of the contact mission. But the more remarkable thing established in that session was the measure. Bashar stated that the altitude of this Essassani craft above Bell Rock would serve as a continuous barometer of humanity's collective readiness for open contact. As human consciousness collectively rises, the ship descends. As humanity contracts into fear, conflict, and density, the ship rises. The altitude is not a random number. It is a reading. And what the community has compiled, through the record of altitude statements given in official sessions since 2006, is one of the most compelling and emotionally resonant data sets in the entire contact narrative. Let us walk through it. In 2006, the ship was reported at approximately 2,735 miles above Bell Rock. Through 2008 and 2009, the figure shifted in the low thousands of miles, dropping and rising slightly as humanity moved through those years. Through the early 2010s, it came steadily down, reaching approximately 1,875 miles by late 2013, the same year of the 3 civilization simultaneous shift. It continued dropping through 2014 and 2015, falling to the 1,300 to 1,540 mile range. By late 2017, it had reached 900 miles. Then something dramatic began to happen in 2019. In the spring of that year, the altitude dropped from hundreds of miles to approximately 1.6 miles, then to 1.38 miles. Barely a mile above the desert floor. And then, in a June 2019 session called Earth Zero, following what Bashar described as a kind of litmus test conducted the day before, the ship jumped back up to 5,000 miles. It rose higher still through 2020, reaching 9,000 miles in an August session called, somewhat ironically, given the direction of movement, increasing probability of contact. Anyone who lived through 2019 and 2020 does not need to ask what happened to human collective consciousness during those years. Through 2021 and into 2022, the ship descended steadily again, reaching 1,280 miles by October 2022. Then in January 2023, In a session called Becoming a Galactic Citizen Part 1, it dropped to 500 miles. And then in September 2023, across 2 consecutive sessions in Sedona itself, the figure given was 700 feet, not miles. Feet, 700 feet above Bell Rock. After that extraordinary low, the ship rose to 1,500 miles in March 2024 and held that position through sessions into late 2025. But the most extraordinary entry in the entire altitude record is what happened in December 2024. In a session called Shifting Realities, someone asked for the current altitude, and for the first time in the entire recorded history of these sessions, Bashar declined to answer. His response was simply, "No comment." In response to the follow-up at the next session in January 2025, when someone pressed him directly on what the December silence meant, whether we were really that close, his answer was 11 words. "You are very close. That is all I can say at the moment." Place that statement in the context of everything we know about the Essassani, a civilization that has been in communication with Earth for more than 40 years. That has been monitoring humanity's collective readiness from an orbital position above an Arizona desert. That represents the third wave of contact in a sequence that the Pleiadians are expected to initiate in 2027, and the Yael are expected to meet face-to-face to confirm open contact. When the most consistently precise communicator in this 40-year record says only that 11 words and then silence, it is worth taking seriously. Third contact. What to expect from the Essassani? So what does Essassani contact with humanity actually look like? And why does it come third in the sequence, rather than first or second? The Yael appearing face-to-face first because they are the most human-compatible of the hybrid civilizations, the most visually similar to us, the most emotionally prepared for the shock of mutual recognition, and because they have been specifically designated as first ambassadors in the Galactic Contact Protocol. Their contact is expected to be physical, face-to-face, and oriented around establishing basic trust and demonstrating that extraterrestrial beings can stand in front of humans without catastrophe. The Pleiadians come early in the communication sequence because of the depth of their historical connection to humanity, and because their role has always been oriented around communication, around the transmission of understanding and the illumination of humanity's own nature and history. They are, in some sense, returning rather than arriving. The Essassani occupy a different position in this sequence. Their contact is expected to develop through communication channels initially, with physical visits anticipated in the period before 2035. The reason for this sequencing is not about readiness on the Essassani side. They have been ready and present for decades. It is about readiness on the human side. The Essassani represent the most philosophically challenging contact of the three, not because they are dangerous or difficult, but because of what they require us to accept about ourselves and our future. To genuinely receive the Essassani is to accept that the chaotic, conflicted, suffering-soaked civilization we currently inhabit contains within it the genetic and spiritual seed of something genuinely magnificent. It is to accept that the future is not locked, not predetermined toward catastrophe, but genuinely open, genuinely creative, genuinely capable of producing a species that builds worlds of living light and travels the cosmos at the speed of intention. That is a harder thing to believe than the existence of extraterrestrials. For many people, it is considerably harder. The Essassani's contact mission, as described across official channelings by Bashar, Elan, and Ryokah, is fundamentally about raising the vibrational floor of human collective consciousness. Not by doing it for us, not by arriving in our skies and solving our crises from above, but by speaking to us, session by session, year by year, decade by decade, offering a consistent, coherent, rigorously developed description of a reality in which human beings are not small, not alone, not destined for failure, but are in fact one of the most emotionally extraordinary species in a very large and very populated galaxy. And that this quality, this wild, difficult, magnificent emotional aliveness that causes us so much pain and so much beauty, is precisely the quality that the cosmos has been waiting for us to mature. Bashar has described himself and the other Essassani contact ambassadors not as teachers delivering wisdom from above, but as mirrors. They reflect back to humanity what humanity already is, already knows, already carries within itself, but has not yet found the vibrational coherence to fully express. The 5 laws are not Essassani secrets. They are descriptions of a reality that every human being is already living inside, whether they recognize it or not. The telepathic connection is not something alien to human experience. It is something every human has touched in the moments of deepest love, deepest grief, deepest creative inspiration, moments when the proxy of language falls away and something direct moves between two people. The Essassani are not showing us something foreign. They are showing us a version of ourselves that chose, collectively and deliberately, to make those moments of direct connection the ordinary fabric of daily life, rather than the exception. Our hybrid children from the future. Let us close with the image that perhaps captures the entire Essassani story most precisely. In the broader framework of the channeled galactic record, Darryl Anka himself, and many of the humans who are most drawn to the Essassani material, are described as having what is called a concurrent incarnational connection to the Essassani civilization. In other words, some souls currently incarnating as human beings on Earth are simultaneously in the non-linear landscape of time described by the 5th law, incarnating as Essassani beings in that parallel future timeline. The separation between us and them is, from this perspective, thinner than we imagine. Not just genetically, personally. This is the deepest layer of the Essassani connection to humanity. Not that they seeded us, not that they watch over us from a benevolent distance, but that in some profound sense, they are us. They are versions of us who made it through, who navigated whatever this moment in human history actually is, who came out the other side of it, who built something extraordinary from the rubble and the beauty of everything we are right now. When Bashar speaks, he is not speaking as an outsider observing a foreign civilization. He is speaking as someone who has a stake in our success that goes beyond diplomacy or cosmic duty. He is speaking, on some level, to himself, to the version of himself that is currently incarnating here, in these difficult, extraordinary, pivotal years, trying to remember something it already knows. The Essassani civilization, place of living light, 500 light-years toward Orion, straddling the edge of the physical and non-physical, creating sculptures of light miles high, traveling the cosmos by tuning their frequency, communicating through the direct transmission of complete experience, is not a destination we are trying to reach from outside. It is something we are growing into from within. Third contact. Before 2035. A ship descending through the atmosphere above a red rock desert in Arizona, carrying beings who look like us, feel like us, remember us, who have been patient for a very long time, and who are, by all available evidence, getting very close to finally saying hello in person. If you have been following this series, you know that the Pleiadians will help us understand what we are walking into. The Yahyel will open the door, and then the Essassani will walk through after them, carrying, in their luminous, half-transparent, miles-high art-making presence, the most extraordinary message any civilization has ever delivered to another. You are us. We made it. So will you. Ayako Sekino, The Bridge Across the Pacific. There is someone we need to talk about. Someone who did not make it into the main body of this presentation, not because her contribution is minor, but because she operates in a dimension of the Essassani contact story that is easy to overlook if your attention is fixed primarily on the channeling record. Her contribution is quieter, more personal, and in some ways more demanding than anything that happens in a seminar room with a microphone. Her name is Ayako Sekino, and her relationship with the Essassani is unlike any other in this entire contact network. To understand why Ayako matters, we need to understand something about the geography of the Essassani contact mission that we have not fully addressed yet. Everything we covered in this presentation, Darryl Anka's sessions, Elan through Andrew, Ryokah through Tyler Ellison, has been conducted primarily in English, primarily in a Western cultural context, primarily reaching an audience steeped in the particular metaphysical tradition of the American and European New Age landscape. That is a significant audience. But it is not the whole world. Japan is a society built, in many of its foundational structures, around the very forces that Bashar's teachings address most directly: group conformity over individual expression, social obligation over personal excitement, a cultural architecture that, for generations, has asked its members to suppress precisely the kind of authentic, joyful, sovereign self-expression that the Essassani describe as the basic orientation of a healthy conscious being. For Japanese people in the late 1980s and early 1990s, the Essassani message did not arrive as an interesting philosophical alternative. It arrived as something considerably more radical. It arrived, for many, as liberation. That message reached Japan in large part because of Ayako Sekino. First contact. Tokyo, 1987. Ayako first connected with Bashar in 1987, 3 years after Darryl Anka began channeling him in Los Angeles. The nature of that connection and how it developed is characteristic of the broader pattern we see across the Essassani contact network. It was specific, personal, and arrived with a sense of inevitability rather than accident. It was not a random encounter with a piece of New Age material that happened to resonate. It was a connection that had the quality, as she has described it, of recognizing something already known. Through the late 1980s and into the early 1990s, Ayako channeled Bashar herself, offering sessions to Japanese audiences who had limited or no access to the English language material coming through Darryl Anka in California. By 1992, she had become one of the most prominent channelers in Japan's rapidly growing metaphysical community. A 1992 report in the Seattle Times, covering the arrival of the New Age movement in Japan, cited her husband Ayako Sekino as one of the movement's pioneers in the country, and described Ayako as one of Japan's most popular channelers. At that moment, Bashar was described in the same report as an entity who had become enormously popular in Japan. Ayako's work was a central reason why. Think about what this means in the context of the contact mission. By the early 1990s, Bashar was not just reaching a metaphysically inclined Western audience, he was reaching into one of the most group-oriented, conformity-structured societies on the planet, speaking to people for whom the message of individual sovereignty and following your highest excitement was not a comfortable philosophical upgrade. It was a genuine confrontation with the foundations of how they had been taught to live. The message was the same message Darryl was delivering in California, but the soil it was landing in was entirely different. And Ayako was the one who understood how to plant it there. Living the teaching. A different kind of courage. After approximately 5 years of channeling Bashar, Ayako made a decision that, in the context of the metaphysical community, was unusual enough to be worth reflecting on. She stopped channeling him. Not because the connection ended, not because something went wrong, but because she recognized, with a precision that speaks to the depth of her understanding of the material, that continuing to channel was no longer her highest expression of the Essassani teachings. The teachings themselves say clearly that the medium of expression is not the point. The point is the authentic embodiment of the state of being that the teachings describe. And Ayako decided that the most honest, most powerful, most aligned thing she could do with what Bashar had given her was to stop acting as a relay for it and start living it completely. This is worth sitting with. In a culture that tends to place great value on the gifted individual who can access what others cannot, the act of deliberately stepping away from an extraordinary gift in order to become a more ordinary but more fully integrated human being is a quiet kind of spiritual courage. It is also, interestingly, precisely what Bashar himself consistently teaches. The goal of the contact is never dependency on the contact. The goal is always for the person receiving the information to integrate it so fully that the external source becomes unnecessary, because the living of the teaching has replaced the receiving of it. Ayako did exactly that. And what emerged from that integration was something that has reached far more people in far more lasting ways than her channeling alone could have. The Infini Method. Essassani philosophy as daily practice. In 2000, Ayako created what she calls the Infini Method. The name is not accidental. Infini, from the French for infinite, points directly at the core of what the method is designed to do. It is a practical, teachable system for raising individual vibrational frequency, and what she describes as living awake, staying in continuous conscious contact with the higher dimensional aspect of oneself, rather than being periodically visited by insight, and then losing it again in the business of ordinary life. The Infini Method is, in essence, the 5 laws and the broader Essassani philosophical framework translated from cosmological principle into day-by-day, moment-by-moment human practice. Not as meditation retreats that exist apart from life, not as seminar experiences that fade within weeks, but as a genuinely integrable way of orienting consciousness that Ayako has spent decades refining, teaching, and living herself. She has taught the Infini Method internationally, in Japan, in the United States, and in France, building a community of practitioners who, whether or not they are aware of the Essassani background from which the method ultimately draws its philosophical architecture, are nonetheless doing the vibrational work that Bashar has consistently described as the actual mechanism of collective contact preparation. Not waiting for ships to land, not passively consuming information about extraterrestrial civilizations, but actively raising the frequency of their own consciousness, and by doing so, raising the collective floor of human vibrational readiness. This is the subtle but profound significance of what Ayako has been doing since 2000. The altitude of a ship above Sedona, Arizona, is a reading of collective human consciousness. Every person who genuinely integrates the Infini Method, or any authentic equivalent, moves that altitude reading. One consciousness at a time, in living rooms and seminar spaces, and personal practice, the preparation for contact is being enacted, not by waiting, by becoming. 2008, the Spaceship Workshop and the Sister Essassani. In 2008, something happened at a joint event between Ayako Sekino and Darryl Anka that stands as one of the most remarkable and personally resonant moments in the entire Essassani contact record. The event was a collaborative workshop, one of a series of sessions in which Ayako and Darryl worked together, combining their respective relationships with the Essassani material in a shared space. The books produced from these joint workshops were published in Japanese and reached wide readership in Japan. But it was not the content of the formal workshop that produced the most significant moment. It was what happened in the space created by that collaboration. During the 2008 event, with both Darryl Anka and Bashar present in the session, Ayako experienced what can only be described as a spontaneous recollection. A memory surfaced of a concurrent life on Essassani itself. In this parallel life, she exists on the Essassani world as a being known as Sister Essassani. The name, in the Essassani language, means living light. And in that Essassani life, Sister Essassani's role is the same as Ayako's role in her present human life. She teaches awakening. She helps other Essassani beings access deeper states of consciousness and more complete expressions of their own nature. Stop and consider the fullness of what this reveals. In the earlier part of this presentation, we discussed the idea that some souls currently incarnating as human beings on Earth are simultaneously, in the non-linear time framework of the fifth law, also incarnating as Essassani beings in that parallel future. Darryl Anka's own connection to the Essassani is understood in this way. But Ayako's 2008 experience goes further. It does not merely establish a connection between her human self and an Essassani civilization she is observing from the outside. It establishes a direct parallel identity. She is not just connected to the Essassani. In a meaningful and very specific sense, she is one of them. She is among the civilization that is preparing to visit us. She is preparing us for herself. And she is doing it in both timelines in exactly the same way, by teaching people how to wake up. The significance of a second channel. One of the most commented upon aspects of Ayako's relationship with Bashar in the years when she was actively channeling was the quality of difference between her channel and Darryl Anka's. Those who experienced both described them as clearly the same entity, the same intelligence, the same teachings, but with a noticeably different texture. Darryl's Bashar is often described as direct, precise, intellectually vigorous, with a quick humor that can be almost confrontational in how efficiently it cuts through self-deception. Ayako's Bashar, by contrast, was described as warmer in tone, more receptive in quality, more inclined toward the felt experience of the teaching rather than its intellectual structure. This is not a contradiction. It is a demonstration of one of the most important principles in the Essassani contact design. The same intelligence, the same truth, can and does express through different human instruments in genuinely different ways. The essence is consistent. The expression is adapted to the channel, and through the channel, to the audience. What a Japanese woman in 1990 needed to hear from Bashar was not structurally different from what a Californian in the same year needed to hear. But how it needed to arrive, the emotional texture, the cultural resonance, the particular doorway it needed to find in order to enter was different. And the Essassani were working through two channels simultaneously, in two hemispheres, in two languages, adapting the same truth to two very different human landscapes. This is enormously important in the context of contact preparation. Humanity is not one culture. It is hundreds of cultures, each with its own relationship to authority, to individual expression, to the sacred, to time, to what counts as credible knowledge. A contact mission that speaks only to Western metaphysical seekers in English is a contact mission that reaches perhaps 10% of the population it needs to reach. Ayako Sekino's work opened the Essassani teachings to a culture that, in many ways, was in greater need of their specific message than any other. And she did it not as a translator of someone else's work, but as an independent, equally valid direct channel who brought her own being to the encounter and gave it a form that Japan could receive. Her ongoing contribution. Infini Global. Ayako continues her work today through the Infini Global platform, which includes teaching, online content, and an ongoing community of practitioners across multiple countries. The YouTube channel she maintains under the Infini Global name carries her teachings in both Japanese and English, making the Essassani-rooted philosophy she has developed accessible to a genuinely international audience in a way that the original channeling work, conducted in Japanese for Japanese audiences in the late 1980s, could not be. The arc of Ayako's contribution is worth holding as a complete picture because it illustrates something that the more dramatic elements of the contact story, ships above deserts, altitude readings, specific dates and predictions, can sometimes obscure. The preparation for open contact with the Essassani is not primarily a matter of waiting for the right moment on some cosmic calendar. It is a matter of becoming. And becoming happens through exactly the kind of patient, consistent, decade-spanning, integrative work that Ayako has been doing since she first encountered Bashar in a Tokyo seminar room in 1987. She heard the message. She channeled it. She lived it. She let go of channeling it and lived it more completely. She created a method from that living. She has taught that method for 25 years across 3 continents. And she discovered, in a moment of collaborative grace in 2008, that she has been doing all of this from both sides of the contact simultaneously. As a human teacher on Earth, and as an Essassani teacher in the civilization that is preparing to meet us. The Essassani contact network that we have described in this presentation is not a collection of isolated individuals who happened to tune into the same frequency. It is a deliberately constructed, multi-channel, multicultural, multi-generational effort to raise the vibrational floor of human consciousness to the point where open contact becomes possible without catastrophe. Darryl Anka anchors the Western English-speaking world. Andrew and Tyler Ellison extend the network with additional Essassani voices. And Ayako Sekino bridges the Pacific, carrying the living light into a culture that needed it in its own language, with its own texture, in its own time. In the Essassani language, her parallel self has a name that describes exactly what she is doing in both her lives simultaneously. Living light. It is difficult, looking at the completeness of that picture, to see it as anything other than intentional. Thank you for listening. Arveo.